Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Steckel. I would like to welcome you here live in Marysville and online. Yes, we have a little bit of feedback. I would like to say hello and thanks for coming in the name of the Ohio Organics Council. This is the second part of our event series that we're holding. I'm really excited. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month, Dr. Fred Michel sent an email. Yeah. He sent an email and said, you know, there's something that you need to see. Can we somehow squeeze this in? There's really an opportunity to learn something before the season is over. They've been really doing some fantastic things, and can we make this an event? And it wasn't really in our timeline, but we made it happen. And you are all here. We have a good turnout. That's great. Thanks for coming. Thanks for supporting compost and organics recycling. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, the Scotts Miracle-Gro Company, and the Ohio EPA for partially funding this event through a grant that we got. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We're gonna just be here for about 2 hours, and then we're going to go outside, have the tour. For the people that are joining us online, when everybody is kind of like going on the tour, we're going to have some video footage of the greenhouses and those trial setups. And you're going to get a kind of like a voiceover. So you will have a similar experience, although you're not here with us, you'll be able to see and hear what's been going on. That being said, enjoy, and I'm going to pass on the mic now to Paula. Right? Okay.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here, both virtually and in person. I am Paula Powell. I lead our R&D, regulatory quality, and environmental health and safety groups here at Scotts Miracle-Gro. Couple safety things first, and maybe some housekeeping. Number one, bathrooms. If you go out this door in toward the cafeteria where you came in and make a hard left back in that alcove, there are both men's and women's restrooms. In the event of an emergency, for those of you in the room, good news, if there's a tornado, you're in our tornado shelter. So just get a little close because people will be coming down to share the space with you. In the event of a fire, tornado 2, an alarm will sound. You won't miss it. Trust me, it's very loud. Our rally point is actually out in the parking lot where you guys came in. There's a couple different exits from this room. Please stay with a Scotts associate, but out the door and back up the way you came. And actually, in an emergency, there's an exit at the back of this room that has steps that go out to our gardens out back. So you can walk around the building that way. If at any point you need anything from any of us, grab anybody with a badge, although you can't even see mine, and we will get whatever you need. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Scotts. You are sitting, oh, can I skip through the agenda? Okay, that's the agenda for today. So you're here in Marysville, Ohio. Which is the birthplace of the Scotts Company. O.M. Scotts came back from the Civil War and opened a little store in what is now Uptown Marysville. And that same store still exists in Uptown Marysville, open to the public. You can go in it just as well as we can as Scotts Associates. In 1995, he merged with another great marketing giant, Horace Hagedorn, to form Scotts Miracle-Gro. And at that point, our headquarters was established forever and ever, I guess, here in Marysville. Today is a beautiful day here on campus, but you guys miss the height of everything. You know, we love summer here. It is beautiful. We had rows and rows of gardens with beautiful flowers, and we donated over 10,000 pounds. Actually, I don't know what the final number was, but well over 10,000 pounds of produce to the local food pantries this year through our efforts. We are the world's largest consumer lawn and garden company. We like that. We're proud of that. And we have a bunch of brands. We are number one in every category that we market. We have an annual revenue of around $3 billion. We have over 5,500 associates. That does include our Marysville plant here, which if you didn't know, fun trivia, all of the turf builder for all of the United States is made right here in the plant that's across the street that you saw when you drove in. So if it's got our patented all-in-one particle, it's made here in Marysville. And then we've been going for, I think we're at 153, more than that, 55, yeah, years now. Our mission is simple, is to help all people express themselves on their piece of the earth. So whether you are a patio gardener, whether you are an indoor gardener, whether you take care of your lawn with chemicals or not, we want to be able to help you. That is our mission. It has been our mission for years, and it will continue to be our mission. We want to meet you wherever it is that you take care of your space. As I said, we lead lawn and garden in the category. See, that's where I got 153. I need to update this slide. We have a national footprint. You guys will hear today. We have our plant manager from one of our local Ohio plants here, but we have 43 growing media plants across the country, in addition to our manufacturing plants for lawn, garden, ortho, and Roundup. We have category expertise and #1 share of voice, and we're very proud of our Grow More Good. As I said, we donated over 10,000 pounds of produce this summer to our local food pantries. We just installed another baseball field for a local up in northern Ohio, I think it was. And so Grow More Good is part of everything we do. We have key retailer partnerships, obviously, Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, Walmart, and then all of your do-it-bests. In 2014, we established the Hawthorne Gardening Company. Got through a lot of changes in Hawthorne over the last couple years, but at the core, we support people wherever they grow, and that's fundamentally important to us. We have a national sales team. I was just talking with our field station manager because I think in January we're going to host most of them. So the tour you guys get today, we get to do for about 200 associates here in January. Talk about not the prettiest time of year to be here. Hopefully they don't get snowed in. But we have a national sales team, and the great part about that is we are in every store all the time looking at our products. Obviously we partner, maybe not obviously, but we partner with Bonnie. You know, we're in the store looking at our live goods too. As I mentioned, we have a world-class supply chain that helps us do as many things locally as possible, especially in our media. So I think you guys are going to talk a little bit about that, right? So I won't go into detail there. And then this is where you are today. So this is an overview of our Marysville campus. You are in our R&D building. You passed our world headquarters as you came down Scotts Lawn Road. Later today, you'll get to go to our greenhouse and our controlled environment center. The one thing that's not highlighted, you can see the little arrow that says to weed research area. So we do most of our herbicide testing in property that's literally across 33. So if you came from downtown Columbus on 33, as you got off at that stoplight, you actually have to make a right and then a quick left. And so there's some fields over there that we do all of that. We keep our dandelions across the street for the most part. That's the important thing to know. So I think with that, I think that's my last slide, isn't it? Oh no, R&D. Of course, I could talk about R&D all day. So we have over 200 associates in R&D, various degrees, everything from engineering to horticulture to chemistry, which is my background. Obviously, we pride ourselves on our intellectual property and some of our trade secrets. We don't suffer from Made in Marysville. We do have, and I think that's on the next slide, but we do have a host of field stations and university collaborations in order to make sure we bring products to market that are regionally important. Key supplier relationships, all of the big ag companies, and then some of the ones that you may not have heard of. And then the state-of-the-art facilities, as I said, you guys are going to get a tour, so I won't go into everything, but one of my, there's a couple of my favorites here on campus. So on the other side of us here is our Aero Garden Lab. So I don't know if you guys are going into it, but take a peek when you walk out the door. That's only a year old and it's super duper cool. We do all of our hydroponic gardens research in that lab. And then across the street, there's a big red barn and it looks like a barn, but it's actually a world-class chemistry lab. So we do all of our formulations work here on campus, but you'd never see it unless you drove on the backside and then you saw the venting. As you guys probably already know, we do everything from pesticides to nutrition to media to some hardware. Our packaging is state of the art, and it's one of the things we pride ourselves on. That's our first moment of truth with the customer, is when they see a product on the shelf. That's their first interaction, and how do we make sure that we are capturing and delighting that consumer? Lawns, gardens, I don't need to read all this, you guys understand that. And then one of the things I want to make sure we hit on is how we actually bring stuff to life. You know, we very much pride ourselves on making sure that we are doing the right thing. What would a good company do? And so part of that is we follow, obviously, for all federally registered products, the GLP, EPA GLP. But we have our own internal system that we call GRP, Good Research Practices, and that governs everything we do from a product development standpoint that falls outside of GLP. It is a set of standards and SOPs that we maintain internally that actually pretty closely follow the EPA GLP program, with maybe a couple of exceptions from all the paperwork that has to be filed. But from packaging and applicators to product safety, toxicology, we make sure that our products serve the consumer and are approved. As I said, we have 4 research stations. Kelowna, British Columbia, that is our Hawthorne Research Station, and that is the only R&D field station for cannabis in North America anyway. That's right across the border there in Canada. Jervis, Oregon. So Tera was nice enough to overlay kind of what the climate colors mean, which I don't know if I knew that, Tera. So thank you for that. Jervis, Oregon, we do a lot of grass research out there, but we also use that in registering products in the West. You know, they are a different coastal climate than here in Marysville. We also have a field station in Apopka, Florida, which is right outside of Orlando. That covers a lot of our southern products. And then obviously Marysville, Ohio, which is not in the middle of Tennessee, which is what it looks like on that picture. Oops. Formatting. Yes, Apopka, Florida is not in the middle of the ocean either, but you get the general idea. We have partnerships with Ohio State, Texas A&M, University of Tennessee, and then also a number of contract research organizations as well. Oops. Okay, now I'm done. Thank you for being here. Tera walked into my office, about a month and a half ago, and said, "Hey, I have this wild idea. Can we host the Compost Council?" Sure. I didn't realize there were going to be so many of you, but hey, we're really glad you're here, and on a Friday as well. And I know that that's tough, but maybe if you guys are like us, it's the only time you can get out of the office, maybe for some personal training, right? So with that, I'm going to leave you in very, very capable hands. Again, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you coming. Thank you to those of you online, and hope you have a great day.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. So my name is Tera Lewandowski. I'm a research scientist for Scotts. I also work with the USCC, particularly with the CREF. I chair their Standards and Practices Committee, and right now we're trying to get the TMAC updated. So if you come to the USCC conference in Daytona this year, you will hear all about it. Today, we're going to talk to you all about what we do with compost here, and we do a lot. So we are not able to cover everything that we do. If you have questions of things we didn't talk about or that we did, after this, we're going to have a panel discussion. So our talks today are going to be me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the research we do, just one trial really. And then Kelly's going to take over. You can see him on the screen there. Kelly's on the West Coast, but he is our regional procurement director, and he'll tell you how we source compost and some of those challenges. Then we're going to go to Rick. Rick manages our growing media facility in Orrville, Ohio. He can tell you about what it's like to manufacture with compost and some of those challenges. And then finally, Greg is our regulatory, and he is going to tell you about some of the regulatory implications of compost. So I'm going to just jump right into this. Okay, so we don't need to read all those words, but we use a lot of compost. And I do like this stat. We are the leading recycler of green waste in North America. We are actually very proud of that, but it means that there's a lot of variability in our compost, right? You think of yard waste from Florida, especially after hurricane season, it's gonna be way different from yard waste from the Northeast. Texas has its own thing. You know, you got drought in Texas, and trying to compost with no moisture is really a challenge. So how do we take all of these composts from around the country and put them into a product that's supposed to perform the same everywhere? It's really difficult, but we do have ways that we do this. And it's honestly, it's through a lot of research and then working with the teams to make sure that we are providing the customer with a good experience. So we have 3 general classes of soils that we will market into: landscape amendments, garden soils, and potting soils. What you see here, so the first row of pots are those 3 composts, and compost that we would put into each of these different categories. The first pots in the front are no fertilizer. The pots in the back, we've added a fertilizer charge. So for landscape soils, we do not expect it necessarily to grow plants. These are to fill holes. This is organic matter into your lawn. We're not trying to germinate seeds in it necessarily. It's our baseline soil, right? So it's just adding organic matter. You can see that front pot, that tomato didn't grow at all. We had some fertilizer, yeah, it grows. So maybe if you were to put in a hole, add some fertilizer, you'd have some results, but it's still not as good as the garden soil. When we get to garden soil, again, we want organic matter, but now it needs to be stable, right? So I can put a seed into it and it will not retard growth. When I add fertilizer to it, it will enhance growth. And then my last line there is potting soil. So potting soil, we also wanted to add nutrients. So you look at that front plant there, there's no fertilizer in it. That plant's doing great. This is a high nutrient compost, stable, and organic matter. So to support these 3 different classes of soil, we have to have different composts, right? I can't expect someone to sell me a high nutrient compost and have it be the same price as a compost I'm paying for landscape. They're different. And you guys know that. It's going to differ depending on the inputs, especially how much nitrogen you're adding. So for landscape amendments, let's just go to the next slide. This is really what we're looking for. So this was a trial run a while ago now, where we have clay soil here. We amended it with compost, and this was just after a rain event. And you can see there's no ponding. And this is something that you'd see. So when you add compost to sandy soil, you get better water retention. When you add compost to clay soil, you get better water infiltration. Both of these are very good. Again, a landscape soil. So we're not looking necessarily to grow stuff, but if you want to fix your yard, this would be something you could use. So here's garden soil, organic matter, stable. So you put a seed into it, that seed will not, that seed's going to germinate. It's not going to be affected by high ammonia or something like that. And then finally, here's that potting soil. The notes here for potting soil, so this one, we tend to stay low on incorporation rates, and that's because when you start talking about pots, you're providing the entire physical structure for that plant root, right? So particle size matters. You want airspace for your plants, but you also want water holding. When you start to add more compost, it can be harder for me. And I'm not saying at one facility, so you guys have probably put compost in a pot and it works, and that's great. But if you're trying to make it work across the country and balance all this, start getting over that threshold and it is hard to balance. So we try to keep it a little lower than that because it makes it work across the country. So this is that one trial that I'm going to tell you about. We wanted to make a high performance compost, and this was on the market a couple years ago. This is called Performance Organics. So we wanted a consistent, high quality, high nutrient compost, and it was feeding a garden soil and a potting soil. So what we did is we looked around the country and we had 3 specs for compost currently. The first was yard waste compost. So this is our, I would say, lowest spec. It has the least regulations on what we need with that supplier to meet. It is not organic. They do not need to use a nitrogen source. It can just be yard waste. And it's, yeah, that's it. We have a couple more specs I didn't put on there, but that's the baseline. Then we go to organic yard waste compost. It can have manure, doesn't need manure, but here's the key. It follows OMRI PFRP methods, and it has a C to N less than 30. So you have to compost it enough to get me below 30 that I'm not going to start pulling nitrogen from plants. And then our highest type of compost, and this at this time was food waste compost. We needed to have a minimum of 10% food waste. Manure was not allowed, and it also was OMRI. So what we did is we surveyed. So I didn't say this yet, and I'm sorry. Kelly will go over this next. We have 35 facilities across the country. Might be more. He'll correct me later. They all have compost. And so what we did is we pulled in all the compost in all 3 of these specifications from across the country to see what we had for 1, and to see how it performed for 2. And the point of this was to make that next layer of spec, that really high quality compost. So we wanted to look at what we had and say, what makes a good compost, and where is it falling in these 3 classes? So this is the trial we ran. We tested over 200 composts from around the country. It was all in pots. So we cut everything with sand to make sure we were balancing out those physical properties as much as we could, but still really testing the chemical properties of that compost. We had controls in there. So negative control, sphagnum and perlite, inert, there's no fertilizer. And then here's the positive. We added this, DNC is a water-soluble fertilizer, so it was immediately available to the plant. 5 replicates. I'll show you some regression data. We test 2 plants. So I'm going to talk about tomatoes and cress. We tested tomatoes for performance. So will it grow a plant? Cress was for germination. So will the ammonia or something else in there inhibit seed germination? And then we had a couple others. Just for time, we're not going to go over. We did have other data sets there. So we ranked these, and we'll show you this. I'll show you the data after this. So here is negative control. Here's the positive control. Nothing else in this lineup has fertilizer. What the growth that you see is due to the compost. So some composts do good. There's some that fall in the middle, and there's some that actually retard growth. And then here was the germination, what you might see. So we had 10 cress seeds in a pot. 80% germination or greater was considered success. All right, so here is...
Why cress?
So we've gone back and forth on this. We tend to balance the ones that can manage EC. So I think Daisy's going to show you later some of her EC work with compost. 50% is high across the board, and we didn't want it just to die necessarily due to EC. We really wanted to get at maturity in this one. And so it was a way to kind of balance those 2 factors.
Can you elaborate on biology?
Say again?
Can you elaborate on biology? In the previous slide said biology methods.
Oh, I'm just showing how the plants ended up at the end here. So I guess the methods, the only thing I haven't told you, I believe these were 4-week trials. So not very long. This was, now these are bigger. This is probably a 6-week, I bet. And then the cress, man, germination tests are usually under 20 days. They come up pretty fast. And then we would just count the seeds. All this is replicated. So it was, the results that I'm gonna show you today are regression, but we would also do ANOVAs because we have that replication. So this is the lowest class of compost. I have blinded where the suppliers are and where around the country they are, but here you can see, here's the negative control, no fertilizer. That's the dry weight of the tomato. Here's the positive control with fertilizer. A lot do great, but there's a lot that don't do great. And when we see stuff that falls below the negative, that means it's actually retarding growth. Something is happening to make that plant not grow at all. Next, we looked at germination. So a lot do well, but we have another tail here that's not doing that great. So this one surprised me. Organic yard waste compost, honestly, didn't perform that well overall when we looked across the country. And I have some hypothesis as to why, but we see better germination. I think the reason we're seeing better germination, if you remember from OMRI organic compost, you have composting requirements. You need to be 3 days at temperature, turning the pile. So you have to meet PFRP. That is a way, it's not ensuring that you're getting to maturity, but it's making that producer watch it more. And so potentially they have a better opportunity to get there, which is why I think we see better maturity with our organic composts. But, and this might be because they're not adding manure. Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe it was a small SKU for them and they're not used to producing organic compost, so it wasn't where their energy was being put on their composting yard. But for whatever reason, performed slightly worse.
So do you have any data on like feedstocks? What these people are using for feedstocks? Is it wood-based or is it?
We do, yes.
Yeah. Repeat the question so everyone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, he asked if we have any data on feedstocks. And yes, I'm not going to show it today, but we would look into it and see what they're using. And honestly, where we ended up here is that manures make a difference. So you need to be adding nitrogen. Finally, food waste. Great performance there. And this is one we're requiring you to add nitrogen in. Only 10% minimum, but it has to be there. We get great performance. And these are OMRI as well. So again, we have pretty good maturity. So then these are all simple regressions. We did do multiple.
Question on the organic food waste. So it's a 10% minimum, but of all the test sites, they could add more if they want to.
Yes.
And did you notice any sort of increase in the test sites that added food waste?
So just
More or less.
10% minimum. And do we see them increase it? So yes, it's 10% minimum. We do see them increase it sometimes. So I assume some of you compost with food waste. What we've seen from looking around the country is at only 10%, you're adding a lot of water and not a lot of nitrogen. You lose volume very fast, especially if you're not mixing those piles together. If you're not combining, you tend to lose a lot of that water. I don't think many people are truly just doing 10%. I think
So why is it so good?
because we're just pulling them into that spec. It was a low bar because if they can do it at 10% and get us what they need. And so when you think about food waste, you could be lettuce, which is 70-80% water. You're composting water. Right. And potentially there's sources of food waste that I'm not thinking of, for instance, coffee, where you have a higher density and the nitrogen, and maybe you'd be okay with less. Yeah, that's another one. Yep. So just a low bar to get them in, but yeah, for a lot of food waste, 10% is probably not enough. Yeah. So these are simple regressions of each of our chemical variables for performance. So this is tomato growth is our response. The predictors are the chemical the chemistry of the compost, sorry. The R squareds are low. You're going to see we had a lot of noise in the data. We did do multiple regressions and got much better, but I don't like showing it to a lot of people because multiple regressions can be confusing, I think. So this is good enough for now. Our best predictors, surprise, surprise, for growth are nitrogen. C to N is a close follow. Again, though, that's correlated with nitrogen, and then it kind of goes from there. We've said this in the past, so I know EC is significant here, but EC does not necessarily predict growth. EC, like when we talk about growing media, like potting media, you want low EC. That is like the standard. If you go to a university, they're going to say, oh, so EC has got to be low. When you talk about compost, it is not the same. And it's because the salts in that compost are different. We're not talking about chloride unless you're composting seaweed or something, right? In general, they're fine as a general rule. And I think the USCC, the CRAF just came out with a paper a couple of years ago that discusses that, a review paper, if you want to learn more about that. So next, this is maturity. I love this. So P, highly correlated with immature compost. Actually, I'm sorry, this was I didn't tell you the direction. This was a positive, this is highly correlated with mature compost. P tends to be found in manures. So, and when you have, I think this is just a marker for it with the manures in the compost, we were doing better. Our second one is ammonia here. Makes sense. High ammonia, it's going to inhibit germination. Ammonia is a predictor of improper composting. And then it kind of goes down from there again.
So this is correlation with immaturity of compost?
Crest germination. So,
Germination.
yeah.
So this is what predicted good or bad crest termination?
I didn't put the direction on it, which I apologize for. I should have put the positive or negative. I don't remember the way we set it up, to be honest. I think it was probably the positive, but I know this is a negative predictor.
So more phosphorus means worse crest termination.
I think it was the opposite that we saw. I think in this one, but I'd have to go back and look. This has been a couple of years now, but it was related to the manures in there. We tended to see that the manure is separated from the non-manure composts.
So, my question is electrical conductivity.
Yep.
That's a pretty high number. We would look at in terms of or germination.
Yes. So that's something okay, so Daisy later, we'll talk. Daisy's another scientist. She's doing the tour. She's going to talk to you about a method called the peat moss dilution method that gets around EC and compost with germination. So it shows you how, if you're going to be germinating seeds and you have a high EC compost, you need to account for it, but it doesn't necessarily affect performance. But we do know high EC will affect germination. So that is probably, this is not necessarily a predictor of maturity, but it will predict germination. Yep.
And please keep repeating the question so that
I'm sorry, I kept forgetting.
we're
Yeah.
like online too. Sorry.
Composting is done by bacteria, fungus, nematodes, microarthropods. So do you have any data on the biology of the compost or
Not-
only the chemical data?
Only the chemical data in this one. Yeah. So I'm going to keep moving because we are behind like I thought we would be. This is all the stuff I already talked about. So we used all this, again, we were making a high quality compost spec and we went to town. So we approved everybody. Suppliers had to do certificate analyses to show that they could. So we're going to guarantee that you need 1% nitrogen. I mean, every time you produce a pile all year wrong. And if you're composting this room, you can tell me that that's not easy, especially if you're varying your feedstocks. So this was important to us and it made them lock in a recipe for us. We tested all first shipments. We did stability on all first shipments to make sure we weren't having, so I think Rick's gonna talk about this later. When you have unstable compost and you bag it, the problems get even worse because now you're truly competing in an anaerobic environment. So we did stability on that first production. Every load that came in was qualified at the production facility. Maybe Rick will talk about that a little bit. And then ongoing, so we tested, we had to retest suppliers every year to make sure that they were still hitting those specs and we weren't seeing slip. So I think in conclusion here, I want to say that we love high quality compost. We love high nitrogen compost. When you talk about national compost supply though, and especially if you're going to pull it onto a label or guarantee that amount of compost, it does get tricky, but it is possible. And I think, let me pass it on to Kelly. The other people who are going to talk today are really important to making sure that that does happen. Go ahead, Kelly. I will advance your slides.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Kelly Walker, Director of Sourcing Growing Media. And hopefully by now you know that with all the efforts that goes into making good compost, one of the assignments that my team has is how are we going to get the compost into our 37 networks throughout the country. And what you can see here, just a real quick couple bullet points. In order to do this, most of the compost that we are sourcing is very dense. So we try to strategize and pull our suppliers in from anywhere from 60 to 100 mile radius. We do have some great compost suppliers that do come out outside that range, but for the most part, if we're successful in targeting suppliers fairly close to our growing media bagging facilities, then we can be fairly successful with our cost inputs and maintaining good quality, clean materials, working with suppliers, making sure that we can control the repeatability that you all have been listening to with Dr. Tera on the labs, work that we require, cost, logistics. When we source compost, in my job, it quickly turned into logistics. Many of you in the audience are experts in producing compost. And you by far now understand that a lot of this is heavy heavy material. So in order to do this, we need to find ways of how we can work together and reduce our costs. And right now, diesel pricing is at a record high, $3-4 in the Midwest, $6 a gallon in California. So those are some of the key points. And the red one was relationships. And what we find is that compost is kind of a living, breathing thing. It smells, it has different feels to it. So critical for success for us is maintaining that real close relationship with all of our suppliers, making sure that they do understand that we are in it as a partnership. We know things are going to go south occasionally, but in order to have that real strong relationship, that's the key for our success. The next slide here is just a real quick map overview of, looks like a weather map, so to speak, but it kind of references and sets the table for how wide of a reach and a span that we have to source. So we have a team of sourcing managers strategically placed throughout the country. I'm talking to you this morning from the state of Oregon, and I have some really good, talented individuals, associates that I'm privileged to work with that are throughout the Midwest, the South, and the Northeast regions. And on slide 39, quickly, just a real quick reference from many of you in the audience to what I was referring to earlier in the conversation about the bulk densities. Bulk densities to us are pretty important. It tells us how heavy the material is. And what we try to do is we put most of our compost on big 18-wheeler belt trailers or walking floors. So we try to come up with a bulk density of an average would be 2.1 yards per ton. Most of our semis are 24, 25 tons per trailer. And you can see here that we have a 50-yard payload. Just to give you kind of a reference, some of our mulches are over 100 yards. The bark fines 75 yards, and compost is, again, very dense, very heavy. So when we're paying the same freight lanes for mulch, bringing it in, you can see here that we average less than half of it just because of the sheer weight and the requirements on the road. And as an illustration, just a walking floor belt trailer, the next slide. This is just simple, a visual of one of the trucks that bring materials to us and then just walk it off the back for those in the audience that may not be aware of that. So this has been just a real quick high level how we approach our sourcing strategies. All of our growing media facilities have such tight demands that we try to just in time. We do build inventories up seasonally, but as you can see, we like the material as fresh as we can. The plant managers demand excellent quality performance, and like me and everyone in the audience, we find ourselves always putting our hands in the material and smelling it for that beautiful black, dark, earthy smell. So that's a quick high-level overview of our Scotts Miracle-Gro growing media sourcing strategy for compost with our 37 facilities nationwide. Thank you. I'm sure we'll have questions later.
All right, good morning. My name is Rick Wentling. They've talked about the various facilities. I happen to run the Orville, Ohio facility here about 2 hours away. Probably some of you in this room have been to our facility in the past. It's one of our 37 growing media facilities. It's also a fertilizer plant and a distribution center. That's the picture of the site there. I've run growing media facilities in Scotts for a little over 5 years at this point. I used to run a plant outside of Philadelphia in eastern Pennsylvania, which used a different compost substrate than what we'll use at our facilities in Ohio. So as Kelly and Tara have talked about, although we have a wide-ranging locations and substrates, there's a lot of work that goes on to make sure that our plants are successful. And right, so this is just one of them. So we talk about physical specifications of the compost. I'll say that I kind of view the plant activity as kind of where the rubber hits the road. We have our R&D folks here that do a tremendous job. They give us a lot of great guidance. Then they're working with folks like Kelly to go out and provide us excessive amounts of this material. So a few things that we kind of watch out for with compost, right? It's got to be free of any pesticides or herbicides, right? It can't have anything like that in it when it comes to us at all. Rocks, concrete, metal, glass, sharp, anything that you would think you'd open up a bag of soil. If you went and you've bought the seemingly high quality material, you open it up and it doesn't feel right, right? It doesn't look right. This looks trashy, anything like that. We don't want any of that in our material. And then of course, weed seeds. Nobody's going to want to plant a pot with some nice vegetables in it, or plant in the garden, and all of a sudden in with their vegetables, here come the weeds, right? So we don't want any of that as well. We want to be able to provide the best substrate you can buy. Particle size, pretty small. We want most of it to pass a 3/8 inch screen, right? Plus or minus. So that gives it a nice uniform size. Bulk density, I think each presentation talks about bulk density with compost. There's issues with quality with that. There's also significant financial impacts of bulk density. I'll talk about that in a minute on a couple different fronts. And moisture, so, in a northern climate like Ohio, we get right, wrong, or indifferent, very wet or very dry material, right? I suppose if you go out to the West Coast, Southwest, or even the Texas plants, maybe they're more consistently dry. And you go to our Wisconsin facilities or upper New England facilities, and it's probably more consistently wet. So you can kind of learn how to process these different types of material. But of course, moisture can support fungal growth, right? We don't want any of that. As we're dealing with it as a raw material, and we certainly don't want to pass any of that on to our consumers inside the products they're buying. But too dry can be too dusty. It also has a feeling of bad quality. So we've got to land somewhere in the middle. Now, bulk density, again, from a plant perspective, we spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. It impacts how our facility runs, both from a throughput perspective and from a financial perspective. If it's dry, obviously something that's dry passes a 3/8 inch screen. It's going to flow very nicely through our equipment. It's going to come out of the trucks nice and clean. It's going to be pretty tremendous to work with on a day-to-day basis. You can get more yards on an inbound truck for the suppliers in the room. Obviously, that's favorable to them. If they're paying the freight or they're passing the freight charges on to us, that's a win-win. More material on the truck. And then when it's drier, what we'll find in our processing equipment is we have lower variation in pre-bag fills. So, we certainly don't want to underfill our bags, right? That's a regulatory no-no. But if you get lower variation, you don't have to overfill them as much, which results in, a better financial performance for us. Wet compost, contrary to that, will tend to provide a higher standard deviation in average bag fills. We use volumetric feeders. Most of our products in the growing media space are sold on a volume basis. So if it's wet, just a little bit sticky, tacky, when we're running through a volumetric feeder, you'll find a higher standard deviation. So then you have to target your overfills higher, right? And that was 1%, that 2%, the difference in that, when you're talking about literal millions of bags, is financial bad guy, right? Just my facilities was probably about midway in the growing media scape inside of Scotts. We make about 4 million bags of soil. So 2% of that volume is a significant amount, and there are a lot bigger facilities than the ones that we operate in Ohio, okay? In warm, wet conditions, our compost can hang in hoppers. This create different downtime issues, inefficiencies in a plant. We like to joke, saying tongue in cheek, what we do is we put dirt in a bag. It's much more complex than that, but it's also a commodity business. Volume is our lifeblood, right? We don't want unnecessary downtime, and it's a result of raw materials that impacts our plant performance. That costs everybody money. Winter on wet material, especially in the northern half of the United States, if any of our material is wet, has a tendency to freeze, right? Most of our facilities are outside. So unless you're set up with, say, heated belts and things, you'll find that it's harder to transport the material around the plant, maybe a little bit chunky as the ice forms in those piles. It's an unfortunate evil of operating in you know, where you have freezing climates, but they do impact our ability to operate. So our higher bulk density material, we're sensitive to our inventory costs. We will find that as you go up in bulk density, especially with large volume substrates like compost, some kinds of with our mulch straits too, the higher bulk density also leads to higher inventory loss as it dries and it literally kind of shrinks with it. We'll take those losses on the balance sheet. And then on the back end of our process, high bulk density material turns into a heavier consumer product, right? So as we ship these products to stores, we pay those freight lanes. And so it's an economy of scale. If every bag weighs a couple more pounds and you're putting a couple thousand bags on a trailer, all of a sudden you can't put 22 pallets on a truck. You can only put 21 or 20 pallets on a truck. My plant, we shipped 4,000 truckloads of finished goods last year. Some of our plants ship 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 truckloads of material into the stores in any given year. So you can imagine just a 7 or an 8% impact on that is a significant amount of money, right? So we are sensitive to that, especially with, and we're talking about that in the space of compost because a lot of our soils SKUs are all compost based. This is a representation of some testing we'll do at the plant level and for contaminants. So what you see here is you're basically taking a defined sample size of compost and literally going through that material, picking out the different sizes, materials, anything that kind of looks inorganic in nature, something that would not look right, not pass our screens. And then we kind of set a bottom line of where that's going to be, what we'd accept. So this is a particularly, I think, bad example in the sense where we had an incident a few years ago, but this is something we watch for on a regular basis, right? So we don't want any of this material showing up because even our processes aren't capable of pulling a lot of this out, right? Especially when it talks about glass or pieces of, say, belting or something that would come out of another machine, grinding machines. Yes, sir.
I have a question about bulk density. So what percentage of your compost partners manufacture compost with covered facilities?
Well, that would probably be a question more for Kelly. I would have to say it's a fairly low percentage. I think he put the number up there. It's just shy of 2 million yards of compost that we buy, right? I can't imagine the size of a collective in under roof facility that would process that SKU.
Can you repeat the question for the people?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, what percentage of our suppliers would manufacture, do their compost work like undercover, right, to help control bulk density? And I said my guess is it's fairly low number, just because of the sheer scale of that, right? I mean, it would be tremendous for the composters in the room. I don't know if anybody's doing it undercover, but if money wasn't an object, I'm sure they would love to do it undercover. So, heck, I'd like to put a roof over my entire plant. I could help control it too. Yes, sir.
They have a spec on moisture content in your material into a bag. What would your number be?
The question is, if I had a spec for moisture content in a bag, what would that number be? I'll tell you, it's going to be probably different for the product that I'm making.
Compost.
So a compost based, I'm gonna say low 20s, high teens.
And when you say compost based, can you give us percentage of how much compost versus non-compost in the mixtures range?
Well, I know my own mixes now of our 37 facilities. I believe that number is different across across a lot of our facilities. Some of our soil SKUs has as much as 95% compost in them, right? We have some products we sell that are literally labeled compost, and that's 100% of compost in those bags. So as Tara was going through the different types of soil, you know, that we'll make, landscape, what do we call it? I don't even think of those terms. Landscape, what's the other ones? Garden and potting, right? The differences in between those would be, it just depends on the site you're operating from, right? And the quality of the compost that's coming in. If it's a lower quality compost and a landscape soil, it's probably fairly high. If there's lower quality of compost, say supplying a potting mix, you're not going to put as much in there, right? You're going to put something in it or boost the quality of that soil. Yes, sir.
And do you do anything to ensure sterility in the compost?
Stability?
No, sterility. So there is no bacteria or fungus that's actually did decomposing.
So I have a slide on that. At the site level, we monitor it for like fungal growth or so that we would be able to monitor our piles to see if anything's visible in there. We don't do any active testing on that. That does come on the front side as we qualify suppliers to make sure that through our R&D group, that they're not providing us a substrate that's going to have an issue with fungus growth.
One last thing. How do you check for viable seeds? In the first slide, there was less viable seeds. So how do you check for that?
So the question was, how do we check for viable seeds in our compost? And I don't know if you guys can answer that one.
So R&D does that in qualifying. We will just check as we do our grow out. So we'll have the replicate soil. If we start seeing a lot of seed pressure, and it's not like one or two seeds, well, that could have blown in. But when you have a seed problem, you know it. It comes up.
Do you actually germinate, or do you check under a microscope or any other?
No. So all composts that are qualified will get a growth trial. And in that growth trial, if we see seed pressure, we got to go back. Yeah. But honestly, usually if you have that much seed pressure, you have other problems too.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question about the particle size. So of the compost you receive your plant, what is too large and you reject? And do you screen it at your plant, or do you receive it? Because I heard an 1/8 of an inch screen material is what you receive. That seems really
3/8. Yeah. So the question is, do we screen the material at our plants? And I'll say that the material coming to us should pass that 3/8 inch screen test, right? But then you do have other, maybe you get a section of your piles that has a little bit higher percentage than our screen test would necessarily pass. Our soils are screened before they're put in the bag, right, to a different level. So we don't want our chunky product of any type, whether it's moisture related or compost quality related, to hit the finished good
So what percent of rejects would you usually get then?
It's fairly low. I don't know so the percentage, the question was what percentage of rejects we would get. Low single digit percent. It's like, I would say as we go through the qualification process for our suppliers, all the suppliers I've worked with in the 5 years I've been at Scotts, we've rarely had an issue that's led to that.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Over there it says, how do you check for, like, is there a number of days on an average they compost it before they send it to you? I know, you said 3 turns for the temperatures, but is it like 3 months, 6 months, 6 weeks?
So the question is what the amount of time we have to validate for the composting process. And maybe you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, so we don't officially set a limit, but when we start seeing problems, so if we see maturity problems and reach back out to the supplier, which Kelly, in these relationship building, we're usually pretty good about that. Often we'll find they'll let it sit for 60 days or something like that, and we will have them put it in for 3 months. We tend to see, especially in dry climates, if you're not getting a 3 month, if you're not letting it sit for 3 months, we're having maturity issues. So that is not a hard and fast rule. That's why we don't make it a rule, because there's a lot of composting technologies out there. You could get there quicker, but if you're not getting there, 3 months is a good baseline.
Thank you.
Quick story, when I was operating my Pennsylvania plant, we were doing compost studies there in larger volumes. And to what Tara's describing, we found in those trials that moisture had a tremendous effect on how long it took those composts to kind of go through their process. And when we kept it too dry, they hardly advanced at all.
Right.
It felt like you were just spinning your wheels. It never moved, right?
Because there's no biology.
Right.
But there's no water for biology.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
So I hear this push and pull between your percent moisture in the bag. You want about 20%, which is way too low for composting. Because around composting, we want about 50% moisture. But the target goal that Kelly mentioned of bulk density of about 950 pounds per yard to pass through a 3/8 inch screen, that is some dry compost. The only way you're getting to that bulk density is if it's closer to your 20% moisture. So I guess my question is, how do you balance then having what are your producers doing to dry out their compost at the end, especially in Ohio and Wisconsin?
Well, I'd say that a lot of it's they're trying to leach moisture out of it, right? Maybe as they're processing their piles in wetter times of the year, that they're not going to take those lower levels of the pile. They're going to leave that there with those, because there's a gradient of moisture through that storage process. What we do at the plant level, and I think this is a large part why we manufacture most things by the yard, by the cubic foot, by the quart size, is we're less sensitive on the customer side to bulk density, right? So when you go to a store and buy a bag of, well, anything we make, and then you go to a different state and buy the same bag, it might weigh completely different, right? And a lot of that is in the moisture story, right? It's really a financial story. We're not selling you a 40-pound bag and 20 pounds of it is water, right? You're going to get the same amount of material in a bag. Where we have to take that impact is on the processing side of it, right? The higher that moisture, and we do deal with this, especially through the winter months, is we'll see our bag rates go down as we're working through higher moisture material. Doesn't change the quality of material, right? If our compost comes in and our mixes are set up the way they're supposed to be, we don't see any excess growth or any other issues with the bag. They just tend to be heavier. And then we take it kind of financially on the chin as we ship. We manufacture at lower weights and ship at higher weights. And, we kind of absorb that cost. That's the balancing act that we have to play.
The weight of the compost you receive from your suppliers, affect the price per yard or price per ton you pay your suppliers for compost? So
the question is, does bulk density basically impact what we would pay for that compost? That's probably a question for Kelly. If I don't know if he's on the screen anymore. I've been told I shouldn't talk about cost. I know it all, but I'll say we don't want to receive material that's super heavy, right? Because then we have to figure out how to dry it or let it sit and let it dry out. It goes back to I think one of my earlier comments is, I don't think our suppliers want to ship it heavy to us either, right? This is all macroeconomics. It's how much fuel costs, and if you can put 100 yards on a truck or 80 yards on a truck versus 50 yards on a truck, everybody wins in that scenario. So I don't think we're pricing or paying anything on a bulk density level. It's in our supplier's best interest to keep that bulk density in check, right, from their end. And honestly, if it's too high and they accept it, that's going to reflect at least at some point in our price.
So you pay by.
Rick, can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, and I guess my other question is, so you do have drying capacity. If you have materials that are wet, you can run them through some kind of dryer.
Most of our plants, I can't think of one off the top of my head that actually has active drying. Like you would think like, I don't know, like a grain dryer where you're actually applying heat to it or applying air. We typically don't do that. Yes, sir.
So do these products, when you get to the store, have a shelf life? And do you ever have to take it back after that it expires? Or But does it all sell within, the spring season and it's all gone? Or?
So the question is the shelf life of our materials. I think with the, we typically, like with growing media products, I think they have basically an unlimited amount of shelf life to them. Daisy, Tara, to use it, I think that's right, unless we claim microbes. So it'll sit. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you're an avid Home Depot shopper, you can go in there and you'll find a bag. If they're not good at rotating their product through those stores, which are typically a responsibility of our customers, you may find a bag we manufactured 2 years ago, but that's because it's been on the top rack and they keep shoving new product underneath it, right? So, but that doesn't mean it's bad; it just means it's old. Anything else?
And let me say, for the questions for Kelly, we'll come back to that during the panel discussion. We'll you can answer that week.
Okay, perfect. Unstable compost. This kind of comes back to what Tara was talking about earlier. How it manifests itself in an appearance of a plant. I don't know how many avid gardeners there are in the room, but I think if you do that, you kind of recognize the site of kind of a soil that's not doing its job, it's not feeding that plant well, right? So, and I think there was a question a little bit ago or a comment about fungal growth. I haven't seen this in my time with compost. I've seen it with a couple other substrates we've seen over the years. If you have the right conditions and you're not cycling around or rotating your material, you may end up with this type of appearance in a raw material before we get to the processing steps. And of course, this starts setting off alarm bells because you don't want to put this material, even if you're screening it, breaking it up, you don't want to put that in the final product that we're going to give to a customer, right? So as we are responsible for flywheeling through our enormous raw material volumes, this stuff here is something we watch out for, that could be something that shows up in an unstable compost. Visual quality. I think a lot of the mixes that we put together as an R&D team have this in mind, right? And I think Paula led off with we're kind of the #1 name in the game when it comes to this stuff. What we don't want is any one of our customers to open up a bag of any of our products and look at it and think in their mind that it's low quality material. And some of that comes into effect with what we were talking about with particle size. If you're going to grow a plant in it, you don't want it too chunky, something that looks cheap. Maybe it's full of wood. So it could also have some of that fungus growing in it or something like that. We don't want any of that, right? That's going to turn into customer complaints and lower our perception to the customer. So if we're manufacturing compost, what kind of controls we use for compost stability? Lots of feedstocks, right? That's kind of talked about earlier. Lots of different things can go into compost. So, I'm an engineer by background, and it annoys me to say it depends, but it does depend on a lot of things, how stable that compost is. The aging protocols, repeatability is extremely difficult in compost manufacturing. Things like moisture content, temperature, like all of that in this complex matrix can create different levels of instability, right? So there's some testing we do to make sure that we're kind of progressing through that process the right way. And I think it's highlighted here, like we use this one method called Solvita. It's a fairly simple method, but it'll help us gauge how far along the compost process is. And we kind of use that as a measuring stick at the locations where we're doing our own active composting. So, okay. I think that was it for my part. I'm going to hand it off to Greg. And if there's any more questions, we'll have the panel here in a little while.
Good morning, Greg Cunningham, Director of Regulatory Affairs. In my past life, I was on the composting side of the world. I don't miss the messiness, so this new clean job is totally different. But putting together these slides, I did realize it's a lot more boring, so I apologize. First, I want to start out with this presentation is really based off of a national distribution of and regulations based on the finished goods, not necessarily only Ohio. If it were only Ohio, it'd be a totally different presentation because you have a lot less common denominators you have to worry about, and it'd be you could do a lot more. So this is more of a national basis. The main regulations that affect our finished goods that may or may not contain compost are State Department of Ag. So I know the Ohio EPA is here today. That's more on the facility side of the compost and the making sure the quality standards for composters are met. We are dealing with, as far as the finished goods, with the State Department of Ag's fertilizer, soil amendment rules and regulations. We do sell a lot of organic products, so we have to be consistent with the USDA Ag Marketing Services National Organic Program. And finally, there is not like pesticides, EPA regulates pesticides on a federal level. There is no federal level regulation for fertilizer or growing media, but there is a model regulation where all the states come together to develop a model regulation, and that association's the Association of American Plant Food Officials. So a lot of the information in here comes from their model regulations as well. So let's start with, speaking of AFCO, this is the AFCO definition that we generally use in 50 states. Some states might be a little more, California's maybe a little more stringent, but this is a pretty good, this is recently worked on by AFCO. It updated a really out-to-date compost definition just a few years ago. I think anaerobic digestion, Dr. Michel, I think, helped us with this definition as well back 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's in a better spot than it was before, but this is the general consensus of what we're trying to meet when we call something compost on our labels. Of course, thermophilic and mesophilic, that is in the definition. All you know better this than I do, those temperatures. And of course, the most important thing in most cases is the curing portion of this, so that you don't get a hot product in a bag. All right, so here's where the national thing comes into play. Our goal here is one label for all 50 states. Our distribution network on growing media can, but does not want to have a California label or a Florida label because that just becomes a nightmare. So one label approved in 50 states, which does sort of affect how we label our product. Not only claims, our claims are somewhat more watered down because California, Oregon on the West Coast, there's a lot more scrutiny on claims. So to get one label there, we do have to make some concessions for the East Coast, for example. I think this has been discussed already, but we're trying to make a product in Maine that the consumer, if the consumer in Maine were to move to Arizona, we want the new consumer in Arizona that used to live in Maine to be able to buy our products and have the same experience. That's difficult. Maine, cold, wet, Arizona, hot, dry. But the goal is to have the same consumer experience no matter where you live in the United States. This might be outdated, but a couple years ago, this was our base materials. So in a lot of our finished goods, we have a base material of either peat, pine bark, rice hulls, compost, that goes along with like the perlite, the sphagnum peat, the pine bark, in addition to these base materials. This is just showing more examples of how we need to make sure that we can formulate with and label. So I'm supposed to be talking about labeling, formatting the label so that we can make sure, be compliant, but also have these base materials where we need them. This is how currently, this is one of our main products here, Miracle-Gro Garden Soil. As you see here, we say it's formulated from one or more of the following. And then we put these base materials in, we just discussed in the past slide: peat, forest products, AKA pine bark, core, and or compost. So in this garden soil, this means in the Midwest where compost might be more available, compost would be the base material. But in Georgia, where pine bark is more available, the base is going to be processed forest products. So that ingredient statement, which is required per the regulations in all the states, in most of the states, that flexibility allows us to have that one label for 50 states. This product would not always have to have compost in it. Now, this is a product that always contains compost. As you see, the states are getting this. The last product's been on the market for many years. This product is a little newer. As you can see, there are a lot of states now want their own ingredient statement. The longer I've been in this, the more states have come out. We've got New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Texas, Georgia, New Hampshire, Oregon, California. All these states are now wanting their specific ingredient statement on the bag, which makes it more complex on the labeling, but also takes flexibility out at the state level. So once we print this bag and have this registration, we cannot flex from our base materials or, hugely from these ingredient statements. This product always has compost in it. And then it also has compost in that first statement as a base material. So in the Midwest states, the compost can be the base, and then we add compost on top of it. So that a lot of this is for quality of product, but also claim based. So I think this product is actually contains compost in the product name. Yeah.
Basically, the reason for this is so they can have one type of bag for each SKU.
Yes, we want one bag for each SKU. So like in Arkansas, in the South, where compost is a little less readily available, or quality compost, we have problems sourcing compost that meets our standards. So in those states, we will find a substitute such as peat humus or pine bark, so that we can, make that quality product still. Now, this product here is a straight compost. And as you can see, required, we have an ingredient statement, compost. Some states decided they didn't like that they wanted the actual source material of the compost in there. So we did so, and it really means nothing, because if you look at this, they allowed us to say it's formulated with one or more of the following. It could be forest products compost, food waste compost, yard waste compost, etc. So basically it met the regulations in their mind, but it really tells the consumer nothing more than just having compost on there. What's that?
Tells them those states care.
Yeah, those states care. All right. So as I said, there's no federal regulation, but we do have APCO that gives us some guidance. And compost, if you're making compost in Ohio, you've got the Ohio compost rules with heavy metals, fecal, and other pathogens that you have to follow based on regulation. For finished goods, though, there is not one good rule for what standards are there. APCO does have this statement in their book, and this is what we live by on our finished goods for 50 states. Some states might be a little more stringent, as I said, but this is a base for 50 states.
How are you dealing with the emerging threat of knowledge of PFAS being ubiquitous and deleterious in the parts per trillion?
So U.S. Composting Council, I think this organization is part of the U.S. Composting Council. We are supportive of their efforts to make sure that they push for regulations, common sense regulations on PFAS. But yes, later in the slides, I just got other considerations, PFAS. It's other considerations because I don't know where this is going to end. But absolutely.
Does Scotts source any biosolid based compost?
So we do, yes, but it's not compost. It's pelletized fertilizer. We do not source currently any biosolids compost.
Are you being approached at all by, dehydrated food waste producers? The big machines, the commercial machines are now taking food waste and dehydrating.
I'm not, I don't know anything, R&D.
Just repeat the question.
Okay, sorry. Are we being approached by dehydrated food waste facilities and companies? I don't know if procurement has or R&D has looked at any of these sources. I am not aware of any.
I've just recently gotten a sample sent to me, but we have not
Okay.
gotten to the site or anything that.
How do you check for pathogens?
So pathogens are on the pre-screen. I believe when we qualify all of our compost suppliers, we pre-screen with salmonella as the baseline. The finished goods themselves, you look at the sphagnum peat moss out of Canada, you look at pine bark, those and perlite, those are your very low risk for pathogens. So we worry less about those materials and more on the items like compost.
Has any of the facilities in New York used night soil?
What kind of soil?
Night soil?
I'm not familiar with, no.
Human waste?
No. Do we use biosolids or human waste in any of our soils? Currently, we do not use any biosolids or human waste compost in any of our soils. So this is the guidance we have, and some considerations we'll go through is heavy metals, contaminants, pathogens, and other, aka PFAS. Yeah.
A little of the microplastics.
Microplastics, so that is something that, so microplastics in compost, we've looked at less because of our strict standards. Microplastic in fertilizer, though, is something that is on a really, really important to us. All right, so the next 3 slides here are just showing you on a nationwide level, there's no consistency. For finished goods in the state of Washington, they base their heavy metal standards for finished goods off of Canadian standards and accumulation of heavy metals. So where California, APCO, USDA, they all base their heavy metals based off of actual product, just standards in the bag. Washington bases off accumulation based on coverage per acre per year. So now, if you look at some of our garden soil bags, we have this wonderful statement. In the state of Washington, do not exceed 120 bags per acre per year. Since we can't, the accumulation levels are so low, we have to limit the bags the consumer can actually put on their land a year based off that. Really weird, probably nobody reads that, but Washington's got some accumulated rules. If you look at Oregon, so on a straight compost, you'd be on per product. So if you don't claim P2O5, your limits are 54 arsenic, 45 cadmium, and 258 lead. And then you've got mercury and nickel in there as well. And most of our products, we do claim fertilizer. So we're also held to the second standard here. Based on percentage of P2O5, there are different limits for heavy metals. And then finally, California is very similar. Based on P2O5, you have heavy metal limits you have to meet. If we sell a straight compost in California, no fertilizer claimed, there are no heavy metals restrictions. It's only for fertilizer claiming products. And then finally, even though the other 46 states on finished goods, I know compost is different, on finished goods have no heavy metal restraints, we do generally follow the Ohio compost heavy metals limits for finished goods, just to be safe.
Do we know how Ohio EPA based their limits?
503 heavy metals, I believe.
No, but I mean, like earlier you said, so-and-so based theirs out of Canada. you know how Ohio?
I don't have the total history. How did Ohio base their heavy metals? I believe somebody in the room might have a better answer. But I believe the USDA did research back in the 60s and 70s and created the 503 heavy metals list for compost and biosolids. And that is very similar to the list that Ohio uses for the compost rules. Would anybody like to? Good.
Yes, and I think maybe the arsenic is modified to the to Ohio. That was done with testing risk assessment that the voluntary action program for Ohio, because Ohio's natural soils are higher in arsenic. So that was kind of adjusted.
So arsenic is a little lower in the state of Ohio.
It's a little higher.
A little, okay.
Not, actually it's the same. Yes, for the moment.
Okay.
The same. Might be.
And there's also a question from online. They're asking, do you have these limitations because you're registered as a fertilizer in California and Washington?
So yes, so in Washington does not regulate soil amendments or straight compost. As soon as you put fertilizer and make fertilizer claims on this, then you become in part of the fertilizer claims or fertilizer regulations. Oregon, they regulate straight compost and have heavy metals on straight compost requirements. California regulates soil amendments and straight compost, but do not have heavy metals. So even among those three states, they're inconsistent. Did I skip one? Okay. All right, I think this was covered briefly, but this is the California standard. So California recycling, which is part of the it's a recycling agency, which is part of the government. And they do have contamination rules for not only compost, but just generally ground chip materials. That level was 0.5 total contamination. And then not more than 20% of that 0.5 though can be film plastic just because of the visibility. So this is relatively new. I believe it was 1% a couple years ago, and they have reduced it to 0.5. But that gives you some examples of what 0.5% actually looks like from a 1 kilogram sample of compost. Yeah, but nobody probably be happy with the left side or the right side. So they allow it, but I will say this now, Scotts won't allow this because we would get 1,000 consumer complaints on this. All right, pathogens. There is no standard or finished goods. There are finished goods pathogen requirements. Therefore, we go back to AFCO statement and we deem high-risk materials, we qualify with salmonella. Now, some states locally might have fecal coliform as an added requirement. If we're producing the compost in those states, we will test for both. All right, claims-based. So this is where some rules and the inconsistencies of the states and some rules affect claims-based approach on labels a little differently. We made a aged compost claim in California once. They required that we had Solvita tests of 6 and higher for all the compost that went in that bag then in California. I know Solvita is probably a controversial test in this room anyway, but California was happy with it, so that's what we agreed to. So aged compost in California, they view as Solvita 6 or higher. In organic matter in Texas. So one of the best attributes of compost is the organic matter. It does so much for the soil. Well, Texas has a really weird soil amendment law that if there's any reference to organic on the label, that refers to the National Organic Program. Even if we say organic matter, they are referring that no, you can't do it unless it's NOP compliant. So that's really got us handcuffed We're working with Texas right now to try to reverse this decision. I've lost it twice already, so we'll try a third time. And then finally, not finally, I guess, but the compost as a nutrient source. We generally do not claim nutrients from compost just because of the regionality and variability of the source material. But it is possible, it is difficult. But as soon as you do so, you cross over into that fertilizer regulation as well, and you're required to claim a guaranteed NPK from that compost in all cases and register it as a fertilizer. And then, let's see here, 100% natural. So that's a loaded question. Try to stay away from 100% natural. Natural is a little easier. A lot of this is intent as well. I think we had a PFAS question earlier. You're not adding anything additional. But a natural claim is a little interesting with compost as well, but definitely possible. But you cannot have anything synthetic in there or processing aids.
Even the nitrogen is insoluble.
What's that?
Nitrogen, total nitrogen is insoluble.
So on this one, so on the breakdown here, we have water and insoluble nitrogen. You have to have a break. You can underclaim your nitrogen. So there might be 0.6% nitrogen in that product, and 0.1 of that might be water soluble. But you don't have to claim it, because especially as your compost source varies from time to time, it sometimes is easier and safer on testing in the marketplace if you underclaim a little bit. Other considerations, allergens. There's no requirement for finished goods, it's only on food products, to call out allergens in a product. However, we do tend to stay away from them on compost sources. I think we rejected a couple compost sources here in the recent years that were peanut-based or crustacean-based compost. Not to say that we won't do it in the future, but that is our stance as of right now. And then the other consideration, I don't have a lot of information on, it's PFAS, but I think it's something the industry, U.S. Composting Council is going to be a great tool for this going in the future, to keep an eye out for everybody here. All right, we'll go into organics a little bit. Compost and organics, Scotts has leaned in heavy on organics over the past 5 years. We've been in it for like 15, but with added stress and importance over it in the last 5. The National Organic Program regulates the food that you buy. So that little logo on the food. It does not technically regulate compost or the inputs used to make the food. However, there's enough research, lawsuits, and FTC that if you're going to say it's organic, our inputs, it has to be consistent with the National Organic Program. So the material, the fertilizer, soil amendment has to be consistent and meet the National Organic Program regulations, even though technically it doesn't regulate it. Compost, weird rule here, initial CN ratio of 25 to 40 to 1. These regulations were made in the late 90s to early 2000s. Maybe somebody else can tell me why the starting CN ratio should be this way, because I don't think that drives organic or quality compost necessarily at that rate. We do have to do PFRP, which makes sense. And then a couple other things here, that sewage sludge is not allowed on organics, but we can use newspapers or recycled paper as compost feedstocks, but it cannot contain glossy or colored inks. So yeah, it really limits you what you can use. This is sort of old also, when colored inks and a lot of papers had heavy metal issues. I think with plant-based inks these days, this is probably an old issue, but it's regulation and nobody's changed it. Oh, blank slide, nice. Okay, some no's. For organic compost, plastic utensils, bioplastics, plastic mulches. So I won't read the list, but a couple of things that are interested here. Ash produced from wood, or treated wood, obviously, but also ash produced from animal meat. So ash from wood's okay, animals not. No synthetic preservatives, biosolids. A lot of the no-brainers are here. And I think I remember what's on the other slide. I think I updated and it wasn't updated. Pathogen requirements for NOP is fecal was 1,000, salmonella was 3 parts, and then the other thing I put in there, I forget. Compostable plastics. The USDA does allow compostable plastics. It's just my understanding that nobody's actually been able to make a compostable plastic that meets those regulations yet. So typical regulation, right? We'll allow it, but nobody can make it. So I think this is something that is still, this is always brought up with the USDA NOP every year, trying to, one, work with industry to make sure that they get to a point where this can actually be a thing. And then I think this is my last slide. Here at Scotts, we do use Omri for our NOP listings. It gives us a level of confidence that we are meeting the standards of the NOP. And then California, if you claim organic, their actual fertilizer agency requires you to be NOP compliant, and they have their own certification. That's all I had.
Stay up here, Greg. Hold on. So hold on a second. Get a mic. So we're going to do a panel discussion where you guys can ask as many questions as you want. We'll repeat the questions here. Remember, Kelly is online. We do have a little awkward where when you have a question for Kelly, we'll have to unmute him and then be quiet in the room so we don't have the feedback. This is going to go to about 10:55, and then we'll stop for bathroom breaks. Hopefully be outside 11 for our tour. And if you are virtual, if you're on the computer, stay on the line at that point, and we will take you on a virtual tour.
Repeat the questions in the mic. Yeah. I've got one here. I'm okay. No. So is this everybody?
It is, and Kelly on the phone.
Okay.
And
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah. Okay, my name's Fred Michel. I'm in the Ohio Organics Council, and I encourage anybody here who's not in the council to join and take a look at what we do if you make compost or use compost. I also do work at Ohio State University and do some research, including some collaborations here with Scotts. We do work on things like persistent herbicides, on use of compost as a fertility source, and compost microbial communities, some questions you were asking. And I'm going to moderate this, so I'll just repeat your questions and direct them to whoever needs to answer them, and cut it off if it gets too short. We have until about 5 minutes till 11.
What's your ideal compost? If you could, if like the best producer in America makes compost, what way for you?
So the question is, what is the ideal compost that you would be receiving?
And I'm from start to finish.
so it depends on where you live. I think I tend to like, I tend to like static pile compost. But it's because I think when they manage it correctly, your barrier to entries are low, and they can be managed correctly if you know what you're doing. If you're turning it correctly, if you're really truly putting the outside on the inside, and you're managing your temperature, lower or attractive. It does become a problem though. We know it's a problem in the Southwest. So if you don't have a lot of moisture, that's gonna be very hard to do unless you have a water truck or some other source. And then there we've got the covered piles.
Are any of your suppliers composters, and do Scotts or any of your suppliers use biochar or experiment with biochar?
Do you accept vermicompost or any sorts of biochar as your supply?
So in the vermicompost, if we might accept vermicompost, but it wouldn't actually be a compost source. It would be a separate product with a vermicompost claim, not as your general compost that we would use.
As for biochar, we are looking into using it. There's a lot of benefits for putting it in your compost or conserving nitrogen, reducing gas off, all that. We can't, it's hard for us to pay more for it though on our end, because once you compost it, it's compost. So if I was to put something on the label that says contains biochar, right? So if I'm trying to drive consumer sales to a product, I don't get that benefit out of a composted biochar. But there are benefits to the producer. The caveat is some of these biochars are so expensive, you need to find one that works for you. And they are out there.
Okay, let me ask you a question, Greg. You were saying that bioplastic bags, you don't receive anything put in that material, but I do know our local facility does accept these plastic compost by
for organics. For organics.
Oh,
okay. So yeah, we might, I'm not sure, accept compostable plastics on our non-organic compost. That was really for organic compost only. Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
And natural compost. Yep.
On one of the earlier slides, you guys mentioned that you are the largest, I guess, intaker of green waste. And I just wondered, are you making any of your own compost, or are you using that mostly for mulches?
Do you accept or make any of your own compost, or just receive it from others?
What do you do with the green waste you receive?
So of the 37 facilities we have, only a few of them are, like, I would call it like vertically integrated to the point where they're bringing in green waste and doing the composting process all the way through the bagged product. The vast majority of our facilities are buying that composted product that our suppliers have already went through that step. So I think that claim is made on it's both internally and externally. We're consuming that product secondhand and producing some of it ourselves.
Kelly, do you know the numbers of how much we produce ourselves? I think you rattled that off once to me.
Hold on a second, Kelly. I unmute you for your answer.
If you can hear me, can you hear me okay?
Do you guys mind unmuting? Oh, do you guys mind unmuting the microphone back there? Yes, please.
Can you hear me okay? Can you guys hear me okay out there? I'm unmuted. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I think the question was, do we source green waste? Yes, Rick did a great job with the overview. Currently, we source green waste up in Lebanon, Connecticut, and Crescent, Texas. So we have 2 active facilities, and prior to that, we had about 4. So we do a little bit there, but two of the 37, to answer the question, facilities are vertically integrated. We source green waste and make our own compost.
The volume, Kelly?
I got my volume turned. Can you hear me now?
There's 2 facilities.
2.
Ask him again. Go ahead.
Kelly, do you know how many yards of compost those 2 facilities produce on a yearly basis?
I'm going to say roughly, I'll get the exact numbers, but we're probably over 200,000 yards. And those are 2 of the biggest facilities. 2 of the biggest facilities we have, Lebanon, Connecticut, and Crescent, Texas.
Okay, let me ask a question from online here. When contracting with a new composter, what is the minimum tonnage or volume that you would require?
This is again for Kelly.
Is that okay?
Could you repeat the question for me?
Contracting with a new composter, what is the minimum tonnage or volume that you would require?
Well, that depends on the facility and where we're sourcing. Some of we try not to be single sourced. So we would try to qualify the material first, and then we would dial in an acceptable range. And I would say just offhand, we try to, come in about 20,000 cubic yards or more from each of our suppliers to get us that volume.
Thanks. Okay, here's another question. What is the biggest challenge in sourcing compost?
I would say right now, the biggest challenge we have is the inerts. Somebody mentioned microplastics. We see a movement across the country where we're starting to get a lot of the landfill initiatives. California 1383 says they want to take 8% of the population in tons and take it out of the landfills. So as we progress, and Scotts has a strict adherence to quality control standards, as Greg mentioned, we see a lot of plastics and glass starting to come into compost. And that's really an evidence of the landfills, diversions, and more transfer stations. The more transfer materials that you get, you're going to get glass and plastic. So we try to work with the suppliers and try to come up with the trommel screens and the star screens and try to work with each supplier to come up with a process, all the way to using air knives and pickers to take as much of that plastic as we can out of our compost. So that to me is probably number one. Number two would be just the weight. We do more of a robust pre-pack. So we're different, as the presenters have talked to you throughout the presentation. We're the largest lawn and garden company in the United States. So we do something different than most all other competitors or suppliers. We pre-pack our materials, which means ideally in certain times of the year when it's really rainy and cold, the material could be heavy. We have to pre-pack that for 4 to 5 months before we allow it, and all of a sudden we hit the spring campaigns and it goes into the market. So because of that, we're buying the challenge of the weight of the material during the winter months and trying to orchestrate that and coordinate that into a good product. So one, glass inerts. Two would be the weight of the product.
As a company, how do you address shrink?
How do you address shrink during storage, I guess, at your facility?
So if you're talking about inventory loss, in the growing media world, we're doing regular inventory cycle checks. We do a minimum every month, and we'll measure every bulk material that we have in inventory. So what we end up doing is taking variances both ways, right? Because as we talked about, different times of the year under different circumstances, you may find shrink in your piles. If you won't see the video later, but as we store tens of thousands of yards of this material, whether it's our compost products, whether it's our bark products, when you start putting, say, excavators and bulldozers on this stuff to pile it up and to store it efficiently, you're creating compaction inside of your piles, right? Some of that is it's gradient level compactions that you have to make assumptions on. So 1 month we may take financial losses and we'll book those losses in 1 month, but then as we maybe produce the product, some of that loss will come back to us, right? We do try to do our diligence on the front end to make sure none of that loss is occurring as it's coming to us. So for instance, like in the trucks that are coming inbound to us, regardless of the product, we're making sure that we're not, say, getting less than what we're paying for.
only thing I'll add to that is, we work hard with suppliers to make sure they're not shrinking once we get them. So if the plant identifies there is a supply that they can't keep, we'll go back to that supplier and have them keep it on their site for longer until it comes to us. Oh, sorry. We just really tried not to have this bad issue. So if it's identified consistently, we can work with suppliers so that they keep the material on their site. Because it's, I mean, if it's shrinking, it's a stability issue. Honestly, we don't want it in the bag anyways. So it would be better if they kept it and get it a little more stable before we took it.
I have a bunch of questions, but I'm gonna ask one at a time. Since Scotts is a national organization, is Scotts doing any work on the state or national level in terms of lobbying or pushing for more composting? Or for landfill bans or other things that would advance composting other than through the U.S. Composting Council, of which you're obviously a member?
So I think the latter point is we're members of a bunch of organizations that can do that heavy lifting. We do have a government relations team, but they are more focused on the direct in-use product regulations and making sure we can catch those. There's just so much going on. We do heavily depend on the other organizations we're members of to be the fighters for that.
I've got a question. Would you market at all for commodity crops like corn, soybeans, that kind of stuff? Or is it all going to ornamentals and maybe small gardens?
So our consumer is primarily home gardens, yeah. We've branched out briefly with Hawthorne into professional cannabis, but that's all we've done. We don't go to professional anything else.
If you see your product results in an empty plastic bag, is the Scotts Research Center working on a way to recycle their plastic bags?
Is Scotts looking at ways to recycle plastic bags is the question.
That's very timely, yes. We're actually starting to look at recycling, using more post-consumer recycled plastic, and then also evaluating compostable bags. Sorry, yeah. So yes, we are currently starting to do R&D work on having more recycling pathways for the bags, creating bags with post-consumer waste, and vetting if we can use compostable bags.
You look at how to recycle is a program we use, and you might see it on some of our products. I think it's on Coca-Cola, and a bunch of big companies use it now. How to recycle actually evaluates our growing media products and says that they're not recyclable because of the organic matter that comes along with the bags. So, and that program evaluates 70% of the, I believe 70% of the recycling facilities in the United States. And if 70% can recycle it, it is recyclable. If it doesn't meet that threshold, it's not. So it's a bigger problem where I think the technology needs to change as well, rather than just the front end. So it's got to be a dual effort.
In the next 20 years, how do you foresee the SKUs of Scotts and the composition of products changing?
In the next 20 years, how do you see your products changing?
Yeah, so I think playing into the more what's it called, full cycle products. So like having these solutions for compostable, the stuff is going to be made important. I think, again, it's just my opinion. We're going to be pushed by, so we already know that the government's looking at different ways to monetize sustainability and carbon credits and all of this. It's going to happen. So if we're not ahead of the game, we're going to be behind it. So any of that, I think, is going to push us into how we market our products.
What would we request with plastics? Has there been any studies on the effects of earthworm and plastics?
Have there been any studies on the effects of earthworms on plastics?
I was asking Daisy. She's been in the earthworm literature more recent than I have, but no, not that I'm aware of either.
Oh, let's see. Okay, this is a question from online. What's a rough breakdown of the types of compost you use nationwide? Yard green waste versus food waste versus others, animal manure, etc. And would you like to see more of one or the other?
So, and this could be, depending on where this goes, Kelly can jump in here too, but I'm going to guess we have the most yard waste, followed by organic, followed by food waste. Morgan, if that's true, but I think if I had to say where I wanted it to go, it would be more manures and compost, more nitrogen sources that are easy to get. Because like a leaf compost is great, but it's seasonal. So having those high nutrient compost is important.
Excuse me, any comments on using cardboard products like that in recycling?
Any comment on using cardboard, etc. in recycling? Are you referring to that as a packaging material or an ingredient?
If you say recycling, I could say compost.
Okay.
Using that as a source for compost.
As a feedstock, right?
Feedstock.
Yeah. Do any of your compost have cardboard as a feedstock? I know you said that you don't accept waxed cardboard in your organic material.
Yeah, so one thing as a company we're trying to do also a lot of these facilities have limited room. So most of the compost that we're bringing in, we're trying to be NOP compliant from the start. That way we don't have to separate piles and have an organic version and a non-organic version. Kelly might know a little better if we get cardboard, but my assumption would be as we try to move more into organic so that for site restraints, that we're probably limiting the number of composts that use those types of feedstocks.
Yeah, and this is Kelly, and right now I'm not aware of any cardboard coming in. We've really had focused that down to.
I'm trying to unmute you if you want to answer that one too.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, to my knowledge, all of our suppliers currently are not bringing us any corrugated box materials in right now into our feedstocks. Now, that doesn't mean that some slip in that to our knowledge, but right now we don't see it coming in.
Compost for a second. The medium that you sell as a fertilizer, what is your primary ingredient in there providing NPK?
What is the primary ingredient in the fertilizers that you make providing NPK?
So we have a couple lines. Our famous green and yellow bag potting mix, garden soil, those are actually using polymer coated fertilizers. And then on our organic line, we have a couple of different organic lines. Some of those lines use poultry litter. Some of those lines are actually utilizing a compost or more complex pellet of like bone meal, blood meal, maybe poultry feather. Those are on the organic side. That's what we're using.
Okay, from online. Does Scotts work with any of the container companies that haul away manure, specifically horse farms that contract container companies? I think it means haulers.
I speak with some previous experience, and I think it affects us as well. Hauling from, especially horse manure, we can't have sharps. That's been an issue with the industry for a while at some horse places, racetracks, etc. Is even though there's valid medical reasons for having sharps on the sites, the connotation of putting the sharp in a little box and seeing it is so negative. Things like that have been thrown in the manure for years. And that is a needle in our compost is the last thing we need.
What are you doing about persistent herbicides in compost?
What are you doing about persistent herbicides in the compost?
Speaking of horse crap.
So limit feedstocks that are known have high persistent herbicides. We know they're out there. We test for persistent herbicides when we validate suppliers. If we find suppliers with herbicides, then we will work with the supplier to remove those feedstocks. Isolate the feedstock, figure out what's bringing it in, then remove it. And then work with, so we can remediate some composts sometimes, depending. So we do watch it though, because again, consumers don't want to see that. honestly, I don't think a lot of consumers know what it is. So even if they do see it, I'm not sure they know what it is, but either way, it's a poor experience. I think, Fred, it's
Okay, I think we're finished with the questions. The next part of the event's going to be a tour of some of the facilities, and we are supposed to meet where?
yeah, so Daisy and Robbie here are going to be taking you guys on a tour. We have time, so please use the bathroom quick if you have one. Maybe meet in the cafeteria, and we'll start funneling people out to the back door where we have a like tractor with a wagon we're going to pull you guys around on. Okay, so let's go in here. We'll start with the R&D greenhouse that's here in the Marysville field station. So this greenhouse is over 17,000 square feet under glass and over 7,000 square feet of bench space. We have 12 bays that look like the one you see here. So in each research bay, there are 3 benches, and we can run trials on each. You can see those booms in the background there. So that's our overhead irrigation. They can be programmed to run as often as needed. We have and do, as needed, also run drip lines on the benches if the trial requires it. Each greenhouse has temperature and humidity control, and we also have shade curtains on top that can be used to restrict lighting if necessary. This can be helpful. So we have, for instance, we have one greenhouse we call it the Florida greenhouse, where we keep it at Florida conditions, so very hot, very humid. Especially in the summer, that can get to levels that is detrimental to plant health. So in that instance, we can pull those shade curtains across and let that greenhouse cool down. We use supplemental lighting in the winter months for good plant growth, to make sure we can run trials all year round. And this actually allows us so we can even fruit tomatoes in the winter if we need to get yield data. So this part of the video you're seeing here is all the lawns research. They do testing for different grass species, herbicides, and controls. This greenhouse here is the gardens greenhouse. So it's similar setup as the other one, but we have gardens plants in here. In this particular image, she's testing the performance of different potting mixes, and that is called a SPAD meter right there. So it's looking at the greenness of the leaf, and it is a different way to measure plant health, kind of an indirect measure. In addition to that, though, we will also do flower counts, plant dry weight, whatever the objectives of the trial need us to measure. So there you go. Same booms and everything else there. So next up, we have an insectary. It's APHIS permit insectary, where we conduct home, lawn, and garden control research on many consumer pests. This is the insect rearing room, where we keep our colonies of cockroaches and ants that we use for research. That right there is a smoky oak millipede, which is a giant millipede found in the southeast U.S. It is non-venomous, and it feeds on decaying matter. So we have a lot of these different things. I'm glad we get to show some. Next up, this is an American cockroach. It is also called a palmetto bug or a water bug, and it's the largest house-infesting roach species. It is found indoors in southern and warmer climates. This, I think it jumped ahead on me. This, I think, is the Madagascar hissing cockroach. It is a non-native species, and it's commonly kept as exotic pests. It will hiss as a defense mechanism. Pause that real quick. And in the wild, it also feeds on decaying matter. And then what you're seeing right here that she's got on her arm is an Indian walking stick. It's a non-native species that can get 4 inches long and does a really fantastic mimicry of twigs. And this last one is a North American vinegroon. It's an arachnid. It's also called a whip scorpion. And I paused it there so you can see that whip-like tail. It can spray 85% acetic acid from the base of its tail when it's threatened or scared. But it is also non-venomous, and it is found in Florida, Texas, Arizona, and Mexico. So this is the AeroGarden R&D lab. If you've never heard of AeroGarden, these are what they are. So it's an indoor consumer hydroponic brand that's been around for 18 years. It is like the Keurig of gardening, where you can, when you have an AeroGarden, you get those little seed cups, kind of like a Keurig pod, and you put them right in. Seeds in there, the fertilizer's in there, soil's in there, and the plant grows. You add fertilizer to the reservoir of water in the bottom. And it's that easy. It comes with the LED light attached to it, and it also has a low fertilizer, low water reminder. And that's really just to make sure that the consumer has success every time they use it. Currently, there's 68 different varieties of plants for sale in this unit. So there's a large selection for the consumer to pick. When they look at plants for this, so obviously this is very small, they are focused on finding compact plants. So for instance, I was in the AeroGarden lab yesterday and they had a pumpkin in the AeroGarden, but the pumpkins were probably 3-inch diameter pumpkins, but it was still cool to see. And a lot of different varieties have, a lot of different plants have small compressed varieties like that. The other things they look for are flavor, the aesthetics of it, and they look for non-GMO seeds. A lot of the research there is on seed testing to make sure they're going to germinate, to be honest. All right, this is the Controlled Environment Center where we do our testing in Marysville on cannabis. So we have 3 cannabis testing facilities around the U.S. This is on hemp. We have another one in Oregon on hemp, and then we have one in Canada testing high THC cannabis. So in that facility, there's 12 grow rooms where we have full control over temperature, humidity, lighting, CO2, and irrigation. And we'll run trials in here to test all parts of the grow. So the nutrients, the growing media, the lights, the sensors, and then some controls as well. Because cannabis is for human consumption, we honestly can't put too many controls on it. Not many are regulated in that way, but there are a few. Trials run for 12 weeks, and then we harvest the flower and measure yields. And yeah, these trials are fun to run. All right, I got a quick little bit here of Becky. So she's doing some genetics work for us. So our genetics program supports our cannabis and our lawns program. And she's showing here gel electrophoresis, which she's using to isolate genes based on the size of the SNP in the DNA. And then she can pull that DNA out and do further work on it. Packaging. So we do as much research on packaging as we do on the products that go inside the package. So the packaging is important because it's got not only to transport the good, but distribute it, store it, and then retailing. It's the first point when a consumer will see a product. So it has to also tell the story of what's in it. So this could be anything from rigid plastics to paperboard cartons, flexible plastics, and corrugated paperboard. So I think here she's testing whether the fit of a box for the components that are going inside of it. So this testing right here, this is a machine they use to test the strength and structure of materials. So it will put pressure on materials to the point of failure. And the end data is used to collected to analyze and validate that the design of that product meets specifications for all parts of that. So including shipping, storage, any potential fail points for that product. This equipment here is being used to test bag seal integrity to assure that the bags are not breaking open or failing while they're being transported, stored, retained, or used by consumers. Okay, next we've got the form barn. So this is where all of the formulations work is done. So if we need batches of fertilizer or a control, they can make it here. And they also do testing on stability. So in this room, you kind of see a couple doors back there. We have different stability chambers, and they are meant to replicate what might happen in different areas of the U.S. So we've got a hot and dry, a hot and wet, so high humidity, and then a ambient temperature. And we'll put samples in there. We'll test them for stability for 2 years. failure in a stability test could be formula clumping. It could be package degradation and cracking. It could be a sprayer that stops working. It could be a weight loss. So if you're losing weight, you're losing water, and that can be from liquid or granular, and that could mean the package is not functioning as expected. They also do spray out testing on the different spray outs to make sure, on the different sprayers to make sure that what you should be getting. So if you're spraying out something on a spray per area, it matters that it's actually accurate. So they'll test that there, and they'll test that for the whole 2 years. And then here's one of my favorite research areas. So this is the gardens outdoor area. This is our raised bed and pots area. And this could be trials for live goods, which would be like bonnie plants. It could also be for plant food, also soils. There's 7 acres total and 123 different garden rows that we can use for testing. When we use garden rows, we use them on a 3-year rotation. So if we put a soil into a row this year, we will not put it back into that row for 3 more years. And that's to make sure we have appropriate negative control. So we don't want organic matter hanging around year after year and just improving our soil over time, because that's not realistic to what a consumer does. We want to be able to see a benefit if we expect a benefit. And that's one of the ways we manage it. That's why we have so many rows. This is just showing some of those different trial areas we have. You can see some of these rows have plastic, other ones have mulch. In general, the choice of ground covering and management's up to the primary researcher running the trial. There could be different reasons to use different ones. So a lot of the mulch ones emphasize consumers, and consumers often use mulch. So we know that water behaves differently. We know that soil temperature can be different when you have mulch versus a ground cover. So having that flexibility helps. That was really fast, guys, and I'm sorry, but are there any questions before we jump over to manufacturing? All right. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Rick, who's sitting next to me, and we'll take you through. And Rick, if you want to pause at any time, please feel
Absolutely.
free.
All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a video tour of our Orrville site here in Ohio. As talked about earlier, it's one of 37 sites we operate in a growing media space across the United States. I would say that no 2 of our sites are exactly the same, and we'll talk about that as we kind of look at this. We'll kind of kick off. Let's see here, get this going. So that's an overview shot. What you'll see and what is pretty common amongst all our growing media facilities is a outdoor storage field of sorts, varying sizes based on the plant size. Ours in particular, our entire site is only about 80 acres, so the raw material fields only end up covering about 10 acres. But we do have sites in our network with maybe as much as 100 acres of raw material storage to bring in, store adequate volumes for their facility. This facility is about an 8 million bag annual facility. We start with a single grind mulch product. And I know this the subject of a lot of today's discussions around compost, but what I'd like to highlight there is the equipment is common amongst whether you're doing a mulch operation or doing a compost operation. That is a horizontal grinder. A lot of the suppliers in the space of compost are using similar equipment to grind and process their compost substrates in order to kick off that process as we go. So we're bringing in single grind mulch in this particular case, running it through a grinder that's several hundred yards an hour of processing. And you'll see in the background going up into a colorizer, making in this particular case, our SKUs for Home Depot and Lowe's bagged mulch product. These kind of loaders are present in all the facilities, whether they're composting or not. We are probably not using like something like a windrow turner to manage compost piles. We're typically using front-end loaders and skilled operators who know how to turn great volumes and turn them efficiently. The heat you see there, right? So this is a wood product, but much like our compost products too, has natural heat to it. So whereas you'll see the steam, the heat from the product itself is creating that moisture to drive off. So whether it's one of our Scotts facilities or whether it's a compost facility, I think people do get sometimes concerned about seeing that. There's certainly a difference between steam and smoke. So this product is just warm to the touch because it has green material in it a little bit. So as wherever you have a little bit of green or a lot of green, you have the heat. Excuse me. So this is our mulch product on the back end of our production line of the colorizer. So we produce 3 different colors of mulch in bulk. Substrates are common to the different colors. At the bottom of that, and in the background of the initial picture there, you saw the large horizontal mixer, which we call a colorizer, right? So the inspect grinded mulch will go through that, have ink sprayed on it, churned up and mixed in a horizontal fashion, and we'll produce somewhere between 220 and 250 yards an hour of colored mulch, then to be stored for a little bit of time, depending on the weather conditions, to allow that ink to set into the wood product so we don't get any kind of leaching off of it. If it's dry and sunny outside, that product will excuse me, be dry within just a few hours. If it's, say, overcast and rainy, it may take up to a day for it to properly set in the product so that you don't get ink runoff when you as a consumer would open up a bag of our product, put it in your flower beds, and expect the color to stay in the product. Regardless of the facility you're looking at, items like the loaders, like the stacking conveyors, grinders, these are pretty commonplace amongst all our growing media facilities nationwide. So here's a shot of the loaders so they're loading, in this case, a brown mulch product into the baggers or into the hoppers that will feed the production lines. Whether we're loading a mulch product or whether we're loading a soil product, this is how we introduce it to the production lines. So you would see in the background that there's a series of hoppers there on the left. For us, that means those could be different mixes, different base substrates. In our case, we're a partial mix line facility. So we do our bulk mixes on the pad, on that cement pad, using different recipes. So if we're making a potting mix or a topsoil or a landscape mix, then we're going to mix it on the ground, drop that mix into one of those hoppers, and then between those hoppers and the production lines, we'll add any kind of required fertilizer charge to that mix that will result in our final product. Some facilities have complete automated mix lines, whereas they don't do any kind of mixing anywhere but in the hoppers themselves. There's a series of hoppers that you put an individual material on each one, and basically a computer mixes it for you. Consequently, we have other facilities of the 37 that do the entire mix on the pad, and they do it manually. They mix it with the loaders and then load the completed mix into a similar hopper system. You'll see in the background large piles. You'll see piles of topsoil and compost. After our products are loaded into the hoppers, you'll see a picture of this is a self-cleaning magnet. So we talked about contamination. Everything goes underneath that magnet. It'll pull out any potential metal waste. It's brought into the building, transferred across our mezzanine into one of our bagger hoppers. So depending on which material it is and going to which line, that large overhead belt brings it in, drops it into to one of those hoppers. Those hoppers then feed and drop down to the individual bagging lines. What is common amongst all growing media facilities, we all have very similar, if not exactly the same bagging equipment. So as it pans down here, you'll see the metal structure with the yellow on it and that flapping lid. That is a volumetric feeder. So we talked about in the earlier presentation is we're putting material in a bag at a common amount of volume in each bag. That flipper and leveling chain advances a certain number of inches, and that certain number of inches is correlated to an exact volume that goes into a bag of soil. Every time that gate moves, that's a bag of soil. So in this particular case, the bag we're running is probably running at about 25 bags an hour. So we mentioned about the delivery and storage of goods. Here we're bringing in a compost product. So the product you'll see go through the bagger here in a minute is compost based. Because of the amount of material you're bringing in, you can't dump it all on the ground and expect it to maintain that level. So you have to push it up into piles. So you have to store it efficiently. So what we do here is we dump material on the bottom of a pile and then consistently use a bulldozer to ramp the material. And they push it from the back to the front. And this happens over and over and over again. Now, the pile that bulldozer is sitting on, that's a good sized bulldozer. That's about a 10,000 yard pile. That seems like a lot of material. We will turn that pile over about every 4 weeks. So the material that it's on right now won't be there for long. It'll be into a finished good pile. Again, you can see the snow. These pictures were taken in the wintertime, very cold, but you still see steam coming off the compost because there's typically always a little bit of heat in these in this material. Now this is a yard-based compost, so it looks nice and dark. It's been screened, so it's mostly leaf material. So on the inside, we have a couple different types of lines. This one is we call our small pack line. It's all manual. In this particular case, we're bagging an orchid mix, so that our operators will manually fill each bag and then prep each bag for sealing. So they're snapping the bag and getting it lined up, taking it through a heat sealer. That is then we're time stamping that product. Every one of our bags has a time and line stamp on it. These particular bags, like all our small pack, then will be manually packed into boxes. Boxes, cases, or mini bins. So these are the same products you'll find in all your store shelves of your major retailers. We consider a small pack bag for anything less than 16 quart. In these cases, this is about an 8 quart product. And we're back over here. I didn't hit the button, did I? I must have hit the button accidentally. I apologize for that. Now, our big bag lines, we do what we call a form, fill, and seal operation. You'll notice that's our yellow bag potting, probably our most famous growing media product. Our bags come in large rolls. They only have a bottom seal on them, right? So as they roll off the line of their roll, they're taken through a form fill device. Those bags then are provided a side seal on both sides. The bags are cut and then they're filled before the top is sealed. You'll see them coming through in a single sheet. And then on the left-hand side, we use heat to create a side seal on both sides, perforate the bag advances, is filled with the potting mix, and then taken to a top sealer, creating a final product of a completely sealed bag. the bags are jumped each time to knock them and get the product all the way down into the bottom of the bag. They come out of the end of the bagging units onto a conveyor system, taken through a flattener. So in particular, a lot of our SKUs could be pillowy in nature. You want to create a stable pallet. So they're sent through what we call a flattener. It's basically a top and bottom belt that as it's transported to the palletizer, it's provided equal pressure top and bottom. And when the bag comes out the other end of this belt, it's nice and flat to be stacked onto a pallet. In our case, we use a belt turning palletizer system. There are a couple different versions of this, but they all do similar things. So they'll create layers onto a pallet. The door then opens up. A layer is created. That pallet drops a little bit further, and you fill a pallet from the bottom up. So this is all automated, and you notice how flat those bags are in the bottom of that picture. That is the other end of that flattener belt from the prior picture. Some palletizers will use arms to turn and locate bags in the right orientation. In our case, we use our belt system, but they all do the same thing. After the pallets are created, then we send them down a trunk line. In our case, we use a hooder. Some growing media products use wrappers, but it's basically a big plastic sock that goes over the entire pallet. And now that product there is now ready to be taken off the line and stored for later shipment to one of our retailers. So if you're familiar with Scotts products, you would probably find pallets that look like this. I think the green stretch film, there's no magic in it in the sense where we tend to make a lot of things green in Scotts, but it is a UV protectant film because our growing media products are largely stored outside, whether it's at our own sites or at our retailers. Those products are stored outside, so they can't be subject to direct sunlight without UV protection as it starts making the bags. Our beautiful yellow potting mix bags will fade just like every other thing will fade in the sunlight. So we do take that step to make it the bags look pristine when they get to our final customer. Bags are then taken off the line. Just based on the number of bags we produce, a lot of our forklift and material handling equipment is all done multiple pallets at a time. In our case, with the size plant we have, we will produce anywhere from 40 to 50,000 bags of product in any one day. So we have to be able to efficiently move product out of our facilities. Now, in this case, the final product is going out. Now, this is not a finished good trailer. As it was talked about a little bit in our earlier presentations, we pre-pack material. Most of our growing media plants do. We'll run tens of thousands of pallets in the fall and winter, getting ready for the spring push. I think it's fairly common amongst our growing media facilities that the shipping rate that we experience in March, April, May, in the height of the season, is probably more than twice our production capability. So that is something that we have to manage around from a planning standpoint. Now, are there any questions I can answer about this particular process? Feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute and say.
This is Mary Wicks. I'm with OSU and also the Compost Council. And I'd just like to say thank you. That was a great tour, great program all day today. You guys did an outstanding job putting this together.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Be a part of it.
Any questions out there? That's a lot to process, literally.
Yes, and I sometimes glaze over things as some of my colleagues do. When you're in it so deep every single day, you kind of take knowledge for granted sometimes.
Right. But no, I think that was very effective tour because you could really see it. I love to see factories and what's really happening behind the scenes. So now when I have a whole new appreciation when I use my Scotts products.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, again, thank you. There don't seem to be any questions.
Okay.
Just for everybody who's still online, I put the link to the Ohio Organics Council in the chat box. That if you're interested in becoming a member, supporting the work that we're doing, that's great. There's also going to be our annual conference on November 9th in Columbus. It's going to be in person only. There's a link for information about that and to be able to register. And Daisy will be sharing some of her research there. Daisy D'Angelo.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll say goodbye and let you guys go take a rest and get back to work.
Sounds good. Everyone have a great day.
Okay, thank you. You too.
Bye, guys.